Washington and Beijing publicly posture as adversaries, but when global stability, trade routes, energy security, and elite economic interests are threatened, both powers often cooperate behind the scenes, especially regarding Iran. Very important that we're understanding this reality. Now, the interesting angles are China needs stable energy flows and global trade. And that's a fact, right? That China needs those things. The US wants to isolate Iran economically without triggering total regional collapse. Neither side truly wants uncontrolled war in the Persian Gulf. Taiwan can become a bargaining chip in wider geopolitical negotiations. Now, it's very important that you understand this fact and reality. Great powers often perform confrontation publicly while negotiating privately. Very important that you begin now to digest these realities. They often put on a show for us in the public sphere, but behind the scenes, they are actually negotiating and not negotiating in the interest of public citizens. Very important that you understand that. So, this is what we're going to be delving into this afternoon. We're going to be looking at Trump and Xi's secret Iran deal, what they're not telling you. And oftentimes, because they meet in secrets, they don't always tell us what they are actually doing. So, are the United States and China really enemies, or are they quietly cooperating behind the scenes when their interests align? In this video, we examine the growing inconsistencies, the contradictions in the global narrative surrounding Iran, China, Taiwan, and the United States. While Washington and Beijing publicly present themselves as rivals, recent developments raise serious questions. Are they really rivals? Perhaps rivals in public. Why has the United States slowed parts of the Taiwan arms posture? They have stalled it, saying that they're not willing now to continue with that $14 billion deal. Why do Trump and Xi suddenly appear aligned on Iran and nuclear weapons? Is China quietly distancing itself from Iran to protect trade and economic stability? Could global powers be negotiating privately while the public sees only staged confrontation? And don't we like the staged confrontation? This analysis explores the possibility that the US China rivalry is more complicated and nuanced than the media presents, a mixture of competition, cooperation, and elite power management and posture. Very important that you understand these realities, as very hard to understand when we see what is happening. A lot of times we can't make any sense out of the nonsense, can we? The world is being told that the United States and China are heading toward an inevitable collision. Trade war, Taiwan tensions, military buildups, sanctions, and threats. Every day, the media presents Washington and Beijing as if they are locked in a battle for the future of humanity. But what if that narrative is incomplete? What if the real story is happening when Iran, well, let me get back to it. What if the real story is not pure confrontation, but selective cooperation? That is what we have to examine. What if the real story is not pure confrontation, but selective confrontation? And that's all they like to do. They like to select what they want to show to us, while in private, they are busily constructing their reality. Okay? And how many oftentimes am I to tell you that? Why do Trump and Xi suddenly appear to share common ground on Iran? Because When you examine what is happening with Iran, something does not add up. Something is just not adding up. Why has the United States slowed parts of its Taiwan military posture? Why does China publicly support Iran while quietly acting far more cautiously behind the scenes? And we're hearing from the news media that China is now willing to buy oil from the United States and to disregard Iran, or by very minimum, they're not going to be buying the huge quantities of oil that they used to buy from Iran. So this afternoon, we examine the possibility that the United States and China are not simply enemies, at least in private, perhaps in public. They may be rivals in public and partners in private. Welcome back to another session on my Declassified Caribbean News channel. Please make sure you like and you share and you subscribe. Now, this is a conversation many people are afraid to have because modern geopolitical conversation is often presented like a Hollywood movie. And that is what we like to watch, right? Good guys, bad guys, clear alliances, clear enemies. But real power politics does not work that way. And this is one of the reasons I'm saying stop watching these movies, because you are being messed up and your minds are being mesmerized. Empires complete while simultaneously cooperating when their interests align. So they compete, not complete, as I probably mistakenly said. Empires compete while simultaneously cooperating when their interests align. Okay? And nowhere is that contradiction more visible than in the growing tensions surrounding Iran. Okay? So they're competing, and they're competing economically, and not necessarily competing in the interests of civilians, of the large majority of the world's population. Publicly, the US and China look like two civilizations preparing for confrontation. Washington accuses Beijing of unfair trade practices, right? Espionage, military aggression, technological theft, and expansionism. China accuses the United States of imperialism, containment, economic warfare, and interference in its internal affairs. Taiwan has become the symbol of this supposed coming conflict. The media tells us that this is the most dangerous flashpoint on Earth, the confrontation between the United States and China. And yet, despite all the rhetoric, the United States and China remain deeply dependent on one another economically. How is that so? American corporations rely on Chinese manufacturing. China relies on American markets. Global supply chains connect both economies. Financial systems connect both economies. These are not two isolated civilizations preparing for total separation. These are intertwined powers managing competition carefully. That is what they're doing. They're managing the competition. That alone should make people question the simplistic good versus evil narrative, or the West versus the East narrative, which many people have subscribed to. Now, let us bring Iran into the picture, because that is the question now at hand, and we see an ongoing war there. It is in process as we speak. Publicly, China positions itself as a supporter of multipolarity and resistance against Western dominance. Many people therefore assume China would naturally stand fully behind Iran against the United States. But geopolitics is not driven by slogans, as many people like to listen to, right? It is driven by interests, economic, political, religious interests. And China has major reasons to avoid full alignment with Iran. Why? Because China depends heavily on stable global trade, stable energy flows, functioning shipping lines or lanes, and a relatively stable world economy. These are factors that and important points that we have to raise. Okay, a massive war involving Iran could disrupt all markets, damage global trade, and create economic chaos that hurts Beijing itself. Now, China also does not want uncontrolled nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. It doesn't want that, which brings us to one of the most interesting developments. Trump and Xi reportedly appear to share similar concerns about Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. Think about that carefully. The supposed leaders of the two opposing global camps suddenly aligned on one of the most important geopolitical questions in the world. That should raise eyebrows. Now, there was an interesting conversation here between Michael Hudson, who is a professor of economics in the United States. I think he's now professor, he's a retired professor, right? But he has a very interesting, he shares some very important insights here with an interviewer on Counterpoint. Did Xi Jinping or did Xi really trade Iran for Taiwan? That's the title of the article. Now, Ali Alizadeh is interviewing Michael Hudson. And he says here the American readout of the Trump-Xi meeting claims that Xi explicitly agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open, but there must be no tolls, that China opposes the militarization of the strait, that China will buy more American oil to reduce its dependence on Hormuz, and that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. The Chinese readout said almost none of this. So there is a, what do you call it now, contradictions here in terms of what the US press says or Western press, are reporting versus what the Chinese press is reporting. It said only that the two leaders exchanged views on the Middle East. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping spent his political capital on Taiwan. So Iranians watching this tonight are asking, did Xi Jinping just trade Iran for Taiwan? Did our most important strategic partner sell us out at the Great Hall of the People while our cities are under blockade? What actually happened in Beijing today? Now, this was Michael Hudson's response to this series of questions. If you have listened to Donald Trump and to the American reporters of early negotiations with Iran and with other countries, there are two versions. And he's suggesting that there are always two versions. There is the American version, which always reads the same way. The other side has agreed to total surrender to everything the United States has asked for. Then there is the other side, which says, no, we did not say any of those things. So we have two competing ideologies or narratives, if you will. So we are dealing not only with a translation of languages, but a translation of what the words mean. What does it mean for the Strait of Hormuz to be open? From China's point of view, it means that there will be continued trade, that all countries, the Arab OPEC countries and Iran, will be able to send their ships through the strait and onward through the Indian Ocean, eastward to China or wherever they are going in Asia. That's exactly what has happened in the last few days. Chinese ships have been freely going through the Strait of Hormuz. They have been paying the tolls that Iran has said are an absolute precondition for any agreement, because Iran has been attacked unjustly in violation of United Nations Security Council rules of war and the rules of international relations. Iran, under these rules, is justified in receiving reparations. But the United Nations does not have any enforcement system. It does not have any equivalent of the Nuremberg Trials Commission. And he went on to suggest. But there's another question that is posed to him, to Michael Hudson. Nonetheless, for some people, the very fact that Trump is visiting China, that Xi Jinping is welcoming him, and that apart from China's insistence on Taiwan, the Chinese are open to flexibility and say they want a good partnership is troubling. For many, multipolarity was imagined as another Cold War. You were one of the first person to write about multipolarity, and that he's referring to Michael Hudson. Can you explain how China is different from what the Soviet Union was, and why China insists on de-escalating tensions with America and avoiding military confrontation? Now, this is Michael Hudson's response. Every country in the world except the United States, Israel, Germany, England, and France wants to reduce tensions. So, of course, the host countries that are not among these belligerent nations are going to say we all want to be partners in world peace. But how can you have world peace if the United States and these countries like Israel, Germany, England, and France do not? How can you work with them when they are not for peace? They are trying to talk reason. Here is a reasonable way to resolve things. But these people are beyond reasoning with. I really wonder what Michael Hudson is trying to intimate here. What they are actually doing when they say we are partners is laying down the principles of international trade, international investment, international banking, and military spending. If you are part of this partnership, meaning agreement to these principles, that is fine. But if you do not agree to these principles, then we are afraid you are not part of this partnership. So he says that, so when China and Russia refer to their enemies as our partners, as they have done again and again, they're not posing as if they will fight back in a confrontational way. That is not the Asian way of conducting a negotiation. You do not say we will fight back, you fight and we fight. That is not the way to fight, to find rather any resolution. Of course, you are prepared to fight, but of course you say, why don't we have a peaceful, logical discussion? Here is the kind of world stability that we are going to create. The United States does not want stability in the world. The United States does not want stability in the world because stability means the status quo, right? So the United States does not, and he is 100% spot on. The United States has continually lost what used to be the American empire. I don't think I agree with Hudson here. The American empire has not yet been lost. The democratic state of the American empire, yes, has been lost. It has lost its trade and balance of payments surplus. It has lost its industrial dominance. It has lost its dollar financial dominance. It is now a big debtor. It has been losing almost everything. That is why the US national security strategy said, in effect, we are no longer going to support a kind of unified world of equality, multipolarity, free trade, and free investment that we supported back in 1945. So what we're seeing now, we're seeing a restructuring, a reordering of the world in which we live. When we had all the power, when we had most of the world's goals, when we had the manufacturing and industrial power to help Europe survive. We do not have that anymore. But they lost that in the 1970s, and I think that Hudson knows that, and he also presented that reality in the discourse here. The only asset that the United States now has to cope with a changing world dynamic is the ability to hurt other countries. It can say, we can disrupt your trade. I want you to listen now. This is what the United States is doing. Trump can impose tariffs to stop your access to the American market. That, of course, will upset your exporters and cause chaos. But if you agree to America's version of the world, if you agree not to trade with Russia, not to trade with Iran, not to permit Chinese investment in your country, if you obey us and become our political and economic satellites, rather, not statelets, but satellites, then you can have access to US market. Otherwise, we are going to disturb your situation. That's what the United States is saying. You have to follow us or we're going to invade. We're going to absolutely demolish your economy. Donald Trump has said again and again that if blocking trade from the Arab OPEC countries and from Iran creates a world depression, that will benefit the United States. Because the United States, he says, is self-sufficient in oil. I repeat this because some of you think the war is, no, it's beating Trump. Trump is trying to create a depression. I repeat this. Donald Trump, and this is being said, I'm quoting Michael Hudson's words. Donald Trump has said again and again that if blocking trade from Arab OPEC countries and from Iran creates a world depression, that will benefit the United States because the United States, he says, is self-sufficient in oil. And right now, the United States is making a killing from the rise in world oil prices. American oil and gas companies are selling low-priced American oil and gas at world prices, not at low US prices. Their profits are going up, their stocks are going up, and they are able to benefit from all of this. So the war is beneficial economically to the United States. It is going to kill the economy of the United States in the sense that the ordinary citizens are going to suffer. But the US oligarchs are the ones who are benefiting from the war efforts. Very important that you understand that. Okay? Now, let us look at a thing here that Michael Hudson is saying. And he went into it was a long interview, right? And I read it all. It took me some time to get through all of what they were trying to present to us. Okay, but I think you should read it. Let me see about here. I saw this with he was talking about the oligarchs here. I seem to have missed it. Here, Michael Hudson here. Neither Iran nor any country needs to financialize. Let me see the question that he's asking here. And this guy is posing to Michael Hudson, because this is important. It has struck me that the Russian government did after the Ukraine war and what the Chinese government has done over the last 15 years looks as though they have read your books and are following some of their insights. Whereas, look at what he's saying now. This is the interviewer asking Michael Hudson some very important questions. Whereas the Iranian government as a whole, I think, has not understood how the global financial system works. So as a final point, I want to take you to December 2025, 3 months before the war began. The Masoud Pezeshkian government, that is the Iranian government, implemented a package of measures, a 50% foreign exchange devaluation, elimination of the subsidized dollar for food and medicine imports, a public sector salary cap of 20% while inflation runs at 40%, and a VAT increase. Listen to what he's saying now. Iran's current finance minister, Dr. Madadzadeh, I can't pronounce his name, I beg your pardon, I'm butchering his name, is a PhD trained at the University of Chicago. So here you have a PhD Chicago University graduate steering the economy of Iran. The institution you have spent 50 years describing as the intellectual laboratory of the financialized rentier model, which all of us are using. So we would have thought that Iran would be opposing that financialized rentier model, but it is not. It is doing exactly what the Western economies are doing, which is actually destroying the economic landscape of Iran. Hope you're listening, because some of you think that you know when you don't know. Since 1989, Iran's downstream petrochemical assets have been quietly privatized to state-linked pension funds and conglomerates that earn in dollars while paying labor in devalued rials or reals. That's the currency of Iran. So what is happening is that they're doing exactly what the West is doing. So my final question is this, the interviewer is asking Michael Huss. How can Iran win the external war against financialized imperialism while losing the internal war to the same model, administered by its own technocrats and ministers? So they're doing exactly what Westerners are doing, what Westerners have commanded that they do, have brainwashed them to do at the destruction of the Iranian men and women. What does Iran need to do internally to its banking system, its tax system, its oligarchic petrochemical sector to make the externals victory permanent? Excuse me. So here we have them waging a war externally, that's Iran, while internally they are doing exactly, in terms economically, doing exactly what their so-called enemies, Western people or the Western oligarchs, are doing. This is what Michael Hudson, this is how he responds. Neither Iran nor any other country needs to financialize its financial system. This is crazy. They are taking current revenue that they need, and instead of spending it as part of the production process, they are investing it financially to draw on it later. You do not have to prepay. You can do what the Germans did, pay as you go. You can do what Adam Smith suggested, pay as you go. But the fact of the matter is that they're doing exactly what the West is doing as far as the internal economy is concerned, right there in Iran. So what is this war about? Is it just a show? The whole West, this is what Michael Hudson continues to say, the whole West has turned away from the dynamic of industrial capitalism that classical political economy outlined in the 19th century. You do not want economic rent because it is not part of the production process. You do not want land rent. You do not want natural resource rent. You do not want financial rent. Okay? All of this is an economic overhead on the economy. You want to minimize the role of the financial sector and make it entirely part of the government sector, as China has done. Listen to what he's saying here, and this is deep, that Michael Hudson is saying. If a country has its ministers trained in the United States, they are trained not to understand what money creation and finance are all about. They are trained not to understand the difference between finance capitalism and industrial capitalism. In other words, if you have your finance minister coming from the West, particularly in the United States, they are trained to destroy your economy. That is what Michael Hudson, okay, who is a professor of economics, emeritus, I'm sure he is, at the University of Kansas, I think he was, or Missouri, can't remember, I think it was the University of Missouri that he retired from. Now, here is where things become even more interesting. The United States approved major military support for Taiwan years ago. Yet parts of these weapons transfers have experienced delays and slowdowns. Why? Why are they canceling it now or putting a pause on it? Official explanations include production limitations, logistical issues, and shifting military priorities. But some analysts are asking another question. Could Washington be strategically adjusting pressure on Taiwan while seeking Beijing's cooperation elsewhere, including on Iran? Now, let me be clear. There is no public document proving some grand secret bargain, okay, even though we know that they're being made. But geopolitics rarely operates through public confessions. Powerful states negotiate quietly. Signals are sent indirectly. Compromises happen behind closed doors. The public often sees only the performance. The public often sees only the performance. Everything is performative. And when you step back, the timing of these developments becomes difficult to ignore. There is a deeper issue many people are beginning to notice. What if the US China relationship is not truly about destroying one another? What if it's about managing competition while preserving a global system that benefits both elites? Think about it. Despite all the dramatic rhetoric, trade continues, negotiations continue, diplomatic meetings continue, economic interdependence continues. The media presents total hostility. Now, I want you to listen to Trump, and I hope that I've seen that it's getting along. My video is going to be a little lengthy today, but you need to listen, you need to learn, okay? And I want you to listen to what Trump is saying here about Xi Jinping. He was asked about what he thinks about Xi Jinping, right? That was what he was asked about. And let's listen to what he says, because sometimes these guys are playing games with us. Well, not with me, because I know what they're about, but you don't want to understand what they're about, so they're probably playing with your little minds. So let me get my thing here and show you the interview in which the interviewer, I think was on NBC, asked him, he's getting a little time to share. Taking this computer is a little bit slow today. I don't know why. Wow. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, it's there now. Okay, yeah. I think it's here. So let me get my thing. Wow, it's taking some time to boot. If not, we're gonna have to move on. If it's taking some time, I just wanted you to listen because I don't want you to say that I am saying things that you have not heard before. It's not coming. It's unfortunate not playing. I don't know why. But he was asked, what does he think about Xi Jinping? Okay. Right? Right. So, and let us look at another one in which I think this one's one I want, what he, directly what he thinks about Xi Jinping and see what he says. Right? Okay. Right. So we're seeing these people, playing games with us. Right? That's what they're doing, playing games with your little minds. Do you know that some of the presidents even don't know, including probably Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, what the ultimate agenda is? You know that? All right? Because we have bigger powers that also control these people. Right? I'm trying to get out of this thing and get my thing back on the thing, but all right. I have to stop sharing. Yeah, and I didn't stop sharing the video. Okay, good. Right. So this is what we're sensing. This is what we are actually sensing. Reality shows constant engagement. That does not mean the rivalry is fake. Okay? The competition is real, but so is the cooperation. And these two realities are happening simultaneously. The rivalry and the cooperation. How does that happen? If you understand the history of the Jesuits and how the Jesuits behave, then you understand what is happening. And the Hegelian dialectic, then you understand what is happening, right? That is how empires behave. They confront each other publicly, while quietly working together when instability threatens the larger system of which they are part. And Iran may be exposing exactly that contradiction. Every war, you must understand how empires function. Not you are going to be entirely deceived. The modern world is filled with managed narratives. Citizens are encouraged to think in simple binaries: East versus West, democracy versus authoritarianism, good versus evil. But real geopolitics is usually far more cynical. Okay, and that's why people ask me, why are you so cynical? Why are you so skeptical? Because a healthy dose of skepticism is what critical analysis and critical thinking is all about. Powerful nations cooperate when necessary, compete when useful, and negotiate constantly behind the scenes. So perhaps the real question is not whether the US and China are enemies, which many of you think they are. Perhaps the real question is what kind of relationship do they truly have behind closed doors? Notice they always say they had 2 hours of meeting publicly, but they stayed at the same place, right? So don't you think they're going to have conversations behind the scenes? Because if Iran has exposed anything else, it is that global politics may be far more coordinated than the public realizes. Okay? Tell me what you think in the comments. Are the US and China genuine enemies, or are they rivals publicly while cooperating privately when elite interests align? If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure that you like, share, and you subscribe, and you send me a thoughtful commentary at the end of watching this video. Because the truth, though painful, is the truth. Thank you so much for joining.